Today's video is sponsored by Dollar Shave Club. I'm a daily user of their products. I shave with the razors, I use the shave butter, the face washes, all that good stuff. So when they came at me to advertise for their product, of course I had to say yes. And for those of you that didn't know, they don't just have razors. They have toothpaste, toothbrushes, deodorant, body wash, and of course, butt wipes. Yeah. Make sure you follow the link in the description or in the comments to go and get your starter pack for just $5. Seriously, $5. $5 is a hell of a steal for a starter pack. And another cool thing is when you support and buy from Dollar Shave Club, it actually helps the channel a lot because they come back to sponsor more videos. I can't recommend enough the shave butter because when you shave with it, it is silky smooth. You don't feel the razor getting caught on your face where it feels like you're bushwhacking and all that crazy stuff. Make sure you head over to dollarshaveclub.com by following the link in the description and the comments to get all of your products shipped straight to your house and not have to deal with people. Because if you're like me, time is valuable, and going to the store and dealing with people isn't something you like to do. So rejoice! You can now sit in your house naked and make your order for all your bathroom supplies and have them shipped right to your door. Seriously, go get your $5 starter pack, help support the channel, and help yourself out, because you're going to save a lot of money. I want to give a big thank you to Dollar Shave Club for sponsoring this video. And once again, don't forget to follow the link in the description or in the pinned comment to get your $5 starter set. And you can start enjoying it immediately. Well, once it gets to your house, obviously. My name is Forrest. I know it sounds like a really country name, but I was born and raised in a very suburban/urban area. I grew up specifically in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the story about my first NDE. NDE means near-death experience, by the way. This happened back when I was in high school during my sophomore year. At the time, I was 16 years old and my girlfriend was 17 years old. One night I was at my older cousin's house for a party that he was hosting. I think he was about 19 at the time, and I don't think the party was for anything special. I just think he threw it for the sake of throwing a party. As the party went on, my dumb teenage self decided that it would be a good idea to get fucked up on some champagne, beer, and liquor, which somehow eventually led to me taking a few drugs later on that night. I can't remember exactly what I took, but I think I had a few bars of Xanax, some Percocets, and a few Oxys. I'm sure I did a lot more stuff, but I just can't remember as of right now. By the time the party had ended, I was super messed up, and I ended up making a huge mess. I eventually blacked out, and when I woke up, I was laying in the upstairs bathtub without a shirt or shoes on, and my older cousin, my girlfriend, and two of my good friends were shaking me and yelling at me. They helped me out of the bathtub, and they showed me the mess I had made in the house. Let's just say it looked like a tornado had ransacked it. My girlfriend, two friends, and my older cousin decided to just put me in bed while they dealt with cleaning the mess, as I was obviously far from and I wasn't in any condition to clean the house. So my girlfriend walked me to a bedroom. As soon as we entered the bedroom she had walked me to, I immediately ran over to the bed and passed out on it, not even bothering to change at all or tuck myself in or even say goodnight to my girlfriend. I was out completely. Now here is where the actual near-death experience starts. So I ended up overdosing sometime in the night, and at one point I stopped breathing. This is what I experienced when that happened. I was just having a normal dream about being at school and getting in trouble, but then the dream transcended into what I can only describe as purgatory. Everything in the dream suddenly faded to complete pitch blackness. I hear this low rumbling sound, and then a bright round light began to appear above me. The light eventually fully absorbed me, and I began to hear a loud repetitive thumping sound. It almost sounded like a heartbeat. I then started to hear a loud ringing all around me. I felt cold, really cold, like absolutely freezing cold. The fact that I was only wearing what I was wearing in the real world at the time, which was literally nothing but a pair of jeans, that's it, only amplified how cold I felt. I felt sadness, despair, terror, guilt, anxiety, and numb all over at the same time. I felt absolutely miserable and mortified. I felt genuinely depressed. I don't know why, but I just did. After a while, I then began to feel pressure all around me. I don't really know how to describe it. The pressure eventually moved to my chest and my torso started aching. My whole body then began to ache. I was then pulling out of the light and back into pitch darkness, and everything was completely silent. I then felt a sudden burst of pain, soreness, warmth, and energy in my chest. Then I was suddenly on the floor of the room. My girlfriend was leaning over me with her hands on my chest, pumping it, and my older cousin was on the phone with 911. Later on at the hospital, my girlfriend even said that when she discovered me early that morning, she thought I was completely dead. I had no vital signs at all. My skin was super pale looking, almost like to the point where it was completely white. And when she put her hands on my chest to perform CPR, she said that my skin was absolutely freezing. She said that it felt like she was touching a block of ice. According to her, I was cold just like a corpse. Husband. I later went on to overdose 3 more times during high school, with my girlfriend having to be the poor soul to do CPR on me and every time save my ass from the consequences of my horrible mistakes. I'm now 20 years old though, and my girlfriend is 21 and we're still together. I haven't abused substances since my last overdose, which happened when I was 18 years old and in my senior year of high school. I'm proud to announce that I've since overcome my past drug addiction with the help of rehab and my girlfriend, and I've been doing very well for myself since. If there is any piece of advice for me to give, it's to never, ever, ever, ever abuse drugs. I mean never. When I was in high school, I was told this chilling story by my drama teacher, Skip, that had happened to him years before. He was absolutely sincere, and it was told to me in private, so I do believe that it occurred. One evening sometime in the 1980s, Skip and his wife were driving back home after a night out. He noticed another car trailing close behind him, following the same route he was traveling. Turn after turn, the suspicious vehicle continued to follow, closing distance and matching speed when Skip attempted to lose the pursuer. Suddenly, he was blinded by its headlights in the rear view and its horn blared at him again and again. Skip and his wife were now terrified by this unknown person or persons and feared for their safety. They knew they couldn't lead this obviously hostile or potentially dangerous person to where they lived and instead chose to drive to the nearest police department. When they arrived at the precinct, the terrorizing vehicle was surprisingly undeterred by the police present, and it stopped when they did, inches from their rear bumper. Skip's wife bounded from the passenger door and quickly entered the police station. Skip stayed behind and watched in horror as the driver exited his vehicle. It was a lone man, apparently very irate, his shirt drenched in blood. Skip was paralyzed in sheer terror and his stomach sank as the man approached his car. Then suddenly his wife was back, bringing with her a group of policemen who subdued the enraged stranger. The truly horrifying details and acute degree of the danger was yet to be realized. Soon after his arrest, police searched the man's house. There they discovered the man's wife, murdered at his hands, her body mutilated and her entrails spread across his backyard. The man that pursued Skip and his wife was an extremely disturbed and delusional psychotic. He had brutally killed his wife just before initiating the car chase. The reason he chose Skip as his target was simply a mistaken interpretation of Skip's license plate, BAN 357, as a political statement about gun control which the man disagreed with, and it triggered his violent rage. I was in New York for New Year's Eve going into 2019. For reference, I'm 17 years old, 16 at the time of this event, and on this trip I was with both my parents and my 2 sisters, aged 14 and 13 at the time of the event. We were taking the 32nd Street subway back to where we were staying in Jersey City, New Jersey. If you've ever been on a subway in New York City, you know that there just aren't trains that take you straight to your destination. There are multiple stops, and our stop in particular happened to be the less busy and least amount of people getting off. This holds some significance later on in this story. As we got onto the subway, my mom, youngest sister, and I split from my dad and my other sister. We were in the same car, but several seats away. Again, if you've been in a New York City subway, I probably don't need to tell you this, but it is very busy on those subways and all types of characters walk through those subway doors. This doesn't faze me as 1, I was born in Newark, New Jersey and grew up near Orange, New Jersey, 2 areas that weren't necessarily the safest and have some of those types of people, and 2, I have some friends and family members that have gotten themselves in bullshit. Doesn't really make them bad people, they're just doing things I don't agree with. I still love them though. On the subway, standing alongside my mom and sister, I noticed a homeless man looking at my mom and sister. I don't think too much of it. My mom and both my sisters are pretty attractive. What got me a little creeped out was that he was staring a little too long and hard, almost predatory. I also noticed that this man had 2 braids on either side of his long, otherwise unkempt beard, which I found kinda cool to be honest. I gave him occasional side glances and then noticed his attention shifted to my sister, who bear in mind is 3.5 years younger than me. At this point I was less creeped out and now I was just pissed off. I swiftly but as low-key as possible got her attention and asked if she noticed him staring. Without giving it a second, my mom jumps in and asks why the man was staring at my sister. I told them both not to look back, and to my surprise, they finally listened to me about something. I wasn't about to start something with this guy because I was with my entire family, but I still wanted to let him know that I wasn't about to just watch him stalk my sister. I promptly stepped into view so he could see us both and stared right into his eyes. I can't lie, it was strange to do this. It could have been weird for him too, but I didn't want him to be uncomfortable. He simply had a look of malice, but his demeanor definitely changed after he saw me. I figured if it came down to it, despite being 5'8" and him being nearly 6 foot, I would probably whoop his ass because we were roughly the same weight. That was until I noticed him digging into his coat pocket periodically. It was almost as if he were adjusting something. As crazy as I might sound, this also didn't stop me from staring right through him, but I was now kinda threatened. Okay, not kind of, pretty damn threatened and suspect. As the stops passed, more people got off the train, but my stare down with this man continued. Obviously, I'd occasionally look away because I was scared at this point, and his eyes just told me that he had nothing good planned. On top of this, he had his hand in his pocket moving something around, and I had no clue if it was a weapon or not, but I still stood tall and strong. Our stop approaches, and I came to the realization that this man had just gone past several stops and was now coincidentally at our stop, having looked at my sister up and down the entire trip. The doors open, and to my surprise, he rushed off the subway. I must have really scared him off, right? Nah, my 6'2", 260-pound dad came up next to us along with my other sisters so they could get off with us, and the pedo must have seen him. After the guy left, I felt like a true brother. We ate dinner as a family, and I forgot about it. Well, the story doesn't quite end there, otherwise there would be no point in telling this story. Of course, I was watching the news the next morning in a state I don't even live in, not even watching the damn news in my own state. My mom was in the room too, kinda overhearing news stories. I will never forget when the news anchor broke a story about a man who was wanted by the NYPD for the sexual assault of 2 girls. One while on the subway and one who was coming off the subway in New York City. They showed surveillance footage of the perp, and wouldn't you know it, this dude from last night's ride home was on our hotel TV. My mom and I just looked at each other, both in apparent shock and disbelief. We didn't say anything, but my mom lectured my sisters about being careful in crowded areas where a lot of people were around. I had to double check to make sure it was him. Sure enough, the guy on my TV had braids in his beard, something they actually mentioned the guy had. It was also mentioned that he was armed and dangerous and anyone who sees him should contact the police immediately. A little hard to do if he's a subway drifter and the New York City subway system has either no service or 1 bar on 3G service, but I guess the intent was good. A lot of things about this just made me realize what was actually going down, and it truly made me the most uneasy I've felt in a very long time. First off, he was staring at my sister, who was pretty, but obviously not 18. This made me question his intentions with her. Second, he waited for our very stop, but probably ran off after seeing my dad. This means he was likely waiting for us so he could do God knows what. As I stated before, I was probably around his weight and definitely had better hands than him, so I could probably handle him. That is, unless he was armed, which leads me to the final thing that put me off about this whole situation. This man was fiddling with something in his pocket, and as much as it is possible, I don't think it was a bluff. Someone living the lifestyle he lives with no real protection and nothing to lose would likely be armed with a pocket knife at the very least. What would have happened if my dad and other sister never came to get off with us and chose the other door? I never really know or want to know. I don't know if the cops caught the man. I'm hoping they did and that he's off the streets for a long time. As a preteen about 10 or 11, I was at the mall with my mom and grandma. We were walking around shopping from store to store when I noticed a man out of the corner of my eye. I got the feeling he was looking at me, so I turned to look at him, made eye contact, and sure enough, he was looking straight at me. I thought to myself perhaps he was interested in the same clothes I was looking at on the rack in front of me, so I walked over to my mom in the ladies section. We soon left the store and I forgot all about the man. About an hour later, we decided it was lunchtime and we made our way to the food court. I told them I was going to use the restroom and wash my hands. They acknowledged me and told me to meet with them in the center area at the table. I walked down the adjacent hallway that led from the food court to the men's and women's restroom. I walked into the men's and it was empty. There were 2 urinals and 1 stall. I decided to use the stall even though I really needed to go number 1. Just as I turned to close the stall door, the restroom door quickly swung open and the man I had seen earlier swooped in and came towards me. I hastily but hurriedly pushed the stall door and locked the latch. The man pulled and tugged at the door and tried to force it open. He shook and jiggled it with more and more force and determination. This whole time I kept saying to myself, "Please let this be just a nightmare." But reality quickly forced me into defensive mode. I stood there holding the latch in the locked position with both hands when he uttered, "Open the door," in a low and stern voice. I thought to myself that if worse came to worst and he tried to crawl under the door through the opening, I would kick and stomp his face as hard and as fast as I could. As he continued for about another minute or so, I peeked through the crack of the door stall and about froze. My heart was pounding so hard as soon as we made eye contact. I confirmed it was the same man I saw in the store earlier. I prayed for someone to walk in and knew this man wanted to molest me. He told me to hurry up and open the door as he reached up to the top of the door and started pulling the door vigorously. The entire stall was moving back and forth and I was squeezing the lock so hard my sweaty hands were white from the exertion. I remember wanting to cry and scream at the time, but I couldn't give up. Just then, out of nowhere, a group of older guys walked in. There were about 4 or 5 of them, all tall and appeared to be in their late teens or early 20s. I unlatched the door, slipped out and forced myself in between these guys and hugged the biggest one as tight as I could. The creepy guy backed up into a corner as the guys made their way in, but because the bathroom wasn't very big, he couldn't exit until they were all in. They looked at me, quickly looked at him, and they must have seen how terrified I was because they immediately started yelling at him, "Are you bothering this boy?" The big guy I was hugging moved me behind him and put himself in between me and the bad guy. They grabbed him as he tried to leave and shoved him against the wall. They asked me if I was hurt. I told them he followed me into the restroom and then tried to force the stall door open. The bad guy denied it, but I insisted for them to believe me that he was yanking at the door with both hands telling me to open it. More people were now walking into the restroom and as everyone shifted, the man broke free and ran off. They chased him and I ran to my mom to tell her what had happened. We notified security, who called the police, and we filed a report. The man got away. Fast forward 10 years and I graduate from the police academy and I join the police department. I swore I would do everything I could to help people in need while putting myself between them and the bad guy. I did this for 20 years and then called it a day to spend more time with my family. Retired and happy, I urge everyone to listen to their instincts. Time and time again, victims have stated they knew something was wrong before tragedy struck. This happened many years ago, but I've just discovered that the person in question has been released from prison. In my mid-20s, I was bouncing around, and after a long, crappy relationship, was most interested in having fun. I was at university, but wasn't the most committed student. I had been working at a restaurant and a hotel, but hated it, and a friend told me about working as a receptionist in a brothel. It's completely legal where I live, and said the money was decent, it fit well with university, and it wasn't difficult, and if the clients were rude, you could just kick them out, unlike hospitality where you had to be polite all the time. I found a place that was looking for receptionists and went for an interview and got the job. And it was fine. I mean, not the most interesting job in the world, but it paid okay. I could smoke out back when cigarettes didn't cost $50 a pack, and I could study if it was quiet. And I know what everyone is thinking at this point. Receptionist is code for sex worker, and I promise it isn't. I have no proof, but lying about it doesn't make the story any better. In fact, if I were a sex worker, it might have been an even more interesting story. Sadly, no such excitement in my life. We had regular clients, and they all had reputations of some kind. This guy only books an hour, but always extends his bookings at least once. This guy will pay extra for dirty talk. A lot of it was innocuous, just information passed between people that we as receptionists always heard about. But some of it was more along the lines of a warning. This guy will try and remove the condom. This guy wants to spank but won't ask first. And then there was the doctor. The doctor had a lot of money and would potentially book multiple workers for a long time. He paid well for reasonably boring extras like fancy lingerie or fantasy roleplay, aka nurses' uniforms. But he had a big red warning sign above his head. The first time he came in, one of the other receptionists warned me. No one has to do an intro with him if they don't want to. Warn the girls it's the doctor. I called the intro, i.e. I went into the staff room and said, "Intro in meeting room 1, which generally meant that every available worker should go in, say their name, flirt, or whatever, after which one of the receptionists would find out who they wanted to see and for how long. And all the workers stood up. And then I said, "It's the doctor." And all but 2 sat back down. So I immediately asked what the deal is, and they explained that he likes his cocaine. He likes his workers who like or pretend to like cocaine. And he's a neurosurgeon who gets access to weird drugs, and often his cocaine is far from pure. Not cut with drain cleaner, but cut with pharmaceuticals, like amnestics used for surgery. He also enjoyed drug insertion. I'm sure you can fill in the blanks. He was sometimes belligerent if workers refused him, after they'd started the booking. And he was just creepy. When we'd go in to check on him, he'd try and grab us, make us, the receptionists, sit down, and to be clear, I'm not what people consider attractive. Plus, he'd do it to all the receptionists. He'd grab our hands and try to stroke our arms. He had this super intense stare, like a mannequin that couldn't actually make eye contact. I know that sounds weird, but it's hard to describe. It's like he's staring right into you, but also not seeing you at all. His expressions were weird and just didn't work on his face. Like his mouth would smile or move, but his eyes wouldn't change from the intense stare. I guess it might have been the cocaine, but it was deeply unsettling and just made you feel sick. Having said all that, there were a few experienced workers who knew how to handle him. Get the most out of him whilst experiencing the least possible risk. It's possible to fake snorting a line. I did not know this before that point, hence giving workers the option to meet the client. I can't remember if he saw anyone for the first time. If I recall correctly, he had a handful of bookings in the time I was working there. We did have strict instructions not to ever let anyone do an out call with him. That is a booking anywhere other than the brothel. Plus, we had a few other harm minimization strategies. Then after a while, one of the workers who was okay with seeing him left to go traveling and no one else would see him. So he'd gradually stopped coming in since no one would intro him. I moved on to receptioning at a different brothel. A new one had opened up closer to where I lived and the pay was better. And he showed up again there. I knew he would frequent all the places he could, until his reputation overtook him. When he showed up at the new place, I told all the workers about him and no one was okay with seeing him. He only tried a couple more times before he abandoned us. A year or so later, I moved on to a different job. I couldn't do night shifts anymore. And I was chatting with a friend from the brothel who said, "Oh my God, did you hear about the doctor? He killed someone and got arrested." And it was true. The doctor had killed a worker who he had seen in his apartment. The worker lay dead in his bed for 2 days. Officially, it was manslaughter, and he also pled guilty to supplying the drug that killed another worker. All this happened because A, he's a terrible dumpster fire human, and B, because one awful brothel manager and owners behind her put profits in front of safety and kept sending workers to bookings with him without giving them full warnings, and specifically sending inexperienced workers, and without keeping them in-house. It later comes out that the medical board had known about his cocaine addiction for many years prior to his arrest and had helped cover up some botched surgeries. It was horrifying to hear about this, and we both spent some time telling stories we knew about him. But then I mostly forgot about it. Then I was chatting with an old friend the other day who reminded me of him, and I got on Google. I found out that he's been released from prison. I hope not practicing medicine, but he could be anywhere now. I always leave my car doors unlocked. Always. No matter where it is, no matter what I'm doing, no matter how long I'll be, it's always unlocked. The reason for this is because I used to live in a really bad neighborhood. There were always robberies. Back then I was a broke-ass college kid. I didn't have shit for a motherfucker to steal. I noticed that some people were getting their windows smashed in on their cars. When I asked around, they told me the cars with the smashed windows were locked. So I left my car unlocked. If they wanted to waste their time looking through it, that's on them. I always kept my car unlocked and never kept valuables in it. A few times it was rummaged through, but I always just cleaned the mess up and moved on. Fast forward to now. I have a closing shift at work about a week ago. I'm a librarian, so I get off at 9 during closing shifts. Not bad, and we all walk out and lock up together. There are 2 parking lots at my library, one on the front where the books are and one in the back where the labs and computers are. Most employees park in the back, but this time I chose to park in the front. I said goodbye to everyone and headed to my car, alone. When I reached it, I grabbed the handle and pulled. It wouldn't open. For a few seconds I was confused. Then it hit me. My doors were locked. Instantly, I was unsettled. I had the feeling I was being watched. I don't know why. Maybe it was just the weirdness of knowing I hadn't locked the door. I looked around, checked my back seat, unlocked it, and jumped in. I started it and tore out of the parking lot. When I hit the main road, there was traffic. It wasn't a lot given the time, but it was pretty slow and kept stopping. I still had a creepy feeling, but it brushed off. I watch too many horror movies. Then, as I stopped at a light, I hear a loud screech and a thump. My trunk had just come open. I waited until I got into a well-lit area to stop. I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station shaking. I made sure there were people around and practically tiptoed to my trunk. Nothing was there, but a few of my things looked like they had been moved to make a person-sized spot. I might start locking my car. And a quick little edit, I have automatic locks on my car door. You open the door, hit the lock button, shut the door, and voila, the car is locked. There's a button in the car you can press to open the trunk. The trunk doesn't open with a key. The button in the car has to be pressed. There's a lever inside the trunk that prevents people from getting kidnapped. You pull it and the trunk is open. Another update as well. I emailed my boss today because I didn't want to call the police unless I had a valid reason. We're going to go over the front parking lot security footage at some point next week and see what happened. Another update. We got the feedback on the video footage. This man, who is a bit off, that comes into my work a lot, got into my car, seemed to tinker around for a few minutes, popped my trunk, got out, looked in my trunk, and closed it. Apparently he hadn't closed it hard enough to latch it, so when I stopped it jiggled open. It wasn't just my car either. He messed with a couple other vehicles. Mine was just the only one unlocked, it seems. This story takes place some time ago. I was around 13 years old at the time. At the time, I was staying with my mom and older sister at my late great-grandfather's cabin in the middle of the woods. It was a dark night around mid-August, and we had been spending the summer there. This cabin has always had its distinct personality. My great-grandfather had built it himself after he finished fighting the war during World War II. The interior is made up entirely of dark wood. The furniture still has the old pre-war Nordic and Eastern European feel to it, where my family's from, and the walls are decorated with old worn-out framed photos of unknown but serious-looking relatives of my family from the past. The house has always had a somehow mysterious, a little offsetting but still calming feel to it. Me and my sister, being curious kids, had just on the previous day looked through some old photo albums belonging to our great-grandparents that we had found in the library. A decision which we both regretted. As it turns out, it was customary back in the days to photograph the dead. And as you could guess, the albums dated after the war were filled with photos of dead bodies sitting or laying around next to their relatives. We went through the album and there were tons of them. From grown-up adults to dead kids to actually babies in tiny coffins. And what makes it worse was almost all of the photos were taken unmistakably right in front of this cabin on the yard. We shivered and wondered if the bodies had been buried here too, but decided in that moment together that we would never ask about it. I mention this photo album detail because it's relevant to understanding why I was already creeped out that night. That evening, me and my sister had decided to sit in the candlelit living room and read horror books together. Because why not? We were staying in an old cabin after all, and it felt atmospherically appropriate. My mom, being a night owl and insomniac, had decided to go for a sauna and shower in the middle of the night. The cabin's wooden sauna is located in the stone basement of the cabin. Another important detail to note is that this cabin is quite in the middle of nowhere of the middle of the forest. There are a handful of neighbors who are at least a kilometer, about half a mile, away. The whole community has lived there for generations and everybody knows everybody. So as a rule, we never had a habit of locking the doors when staying there. The only person that ever locked the front door in the cabin was me, and I always did it accidentally by slamming the door too hard so it automatically locked. So it was midnight. My mom was down in the basement, and me and my sister were reading horror stories in the living room. We were in a mostly light mood, despite both of us feeling a bit creeped out, when suddenly out of nowhere we hear a faint knock on the door. We both jump up. We barely ever had visitors during the day, and nobody ever showed up unannounced during the night at this place. We decided in that moment that we were probably mistaken in feeling spooked out by the stories, and it must have been the wind that was making the noise. But no. The faint, calm knocking came again. Then louder knocking followed. We realized that undeniably there had to be someone out there and they wanted to get in. In horror, we both ran to the kitchen to grab something to defend ourselves with. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find and had a quick conversation with my sister on whether we should go to the basement to get our mom. The knocking continues, and at this time whoever it was wasn't knocking on the door anymore, but they had moved to the curtain-covered window next to the door to knock on it instead. My adrenaline kicked in and I was feeling a little braver, so we decided to walk slowly toward the door and I decided to take a peek out the window. I moved the curtain slightly to take a look, however I see nothing but darkness out there. I closed the curtain and turned to my sister when suddenly somebody tries to pull the door aggressively. We both flinch, but thankfully I was the last person to enter the cabin that evening. The door's locked. At this point in time, it was just us. 2 kids with kitchen knives and some strange person trying to get into our cabin in the middle of the night, and the only thing separating us is a wooden door. At this point, we've had enough spooks, so my sister runs down to get my mom from the basement as I stand shaking by the door holding a big-ass knife. I hear footsteps on the front porch, but no more knocking or attempts to open the door. My mom comes upstairs and she seems to be in disbelief that anyone would be trying to get in at this hour. We all stayed in the living room waiting for more sounds, but an hour passes by and we hear nothing. Until suddenly we hear loud panicked knocking on the door. We all jump at the sound and my mom goes rapidly to the window to open the curtain and check who it is. Suddenly, upon seeing who it is, she mutters, "What the?" and slowly opens the door. We hear her exchange a conversation with a woman whose voice is familiar. We walk over to check who it is and realize that it's our aunt, my mom's sister, who lives on the other side of the county, standing on our front porch in the middle of the night. She looks scared and panicked, and my mom keeps apologizing to her. "No, sorry, you can't stay here. I'll order you a taxi somewhere safe," and closes the door. After some time, we see a taxi arrive and watch her leave with it. Our mom double-checks that the door is locked and comes over to us looking worried. We ask her about what had happened, and she tells us that her sister had told her that there had been some dispute and now she's being chased by a handful of dangerous and angry men that wanted to kill her and are trying to track her down. She's been trying to run and hide from them for 2 days straight now. She's always lived kind of a wild life, but this was something new. The part of the story that really brought me the chills is that the aunt claims that she had arrived at our front porch that very moment when we heard the panicked knocking on the door. She certainly had not been standing there quietly for an hour or been knocking on the windows, meaning that whoever the person faintly knocking on the door about an hour before her arrival wasn't her. We have no idea who it was or what their intentions were, but I know that given the extraordinary circumstances, I would reckon it was likely one of the men who was trying to track her down. I still keep thinking back to that night. Whatever could have happened had that door not been locked. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the notification button, subscribe, hit like, all that good stuff. And I want to give another shout out to Dollar Shave Club for sponsoring another video. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you click the link in the description or in the pinned comment to help out the channel, save yourself some money, all that good stuff. I hope everyone's having a great weekend, and I really do appreciate you listening to this video. Even though it might not be the weekend when some of you are listening, but whatever. It's the weekend when I'm posting it. I will catch you all in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. Bad bye. My wife was 2 minutes pregnant and had a craving for some pork rinds, so she asked me to go to the store. Obviously, I had to help her out in this situation, so I grabbed my car keys and started driving down the road. I made it 3 blocks and was at a stoplight and a car pulled up behind me, which obviously isn't odd. Once the light turns green, I start taking off, and immediately this car starts flashing its lights at me. I figured they were in a hurry and I was slowing them down, so I decided to take a detour down an alley to try to wrap back around and let them go about their business. But they kept following me. I started speeding up a little bit more, the panic building, and I quickly made the turns needed to get back on my original route. This car in hot pursuit the entire time. I called my wife and told her what was happening, and she started panicking as well, telling me to come straight home. But there was no way in hell I was going to bring these people back to my house with my 2-minute pregnant wife. So I told her I would do my best to lose them, and then I would go get her pork rinds and then head home because I'm a good man. I slam the accelerator to the floor and I start taking off, hitting the governed speed pretty quickly. I'm doing 120 down residential streets trying to lose this car. Fortunately, it's miles of straight streets. I decide now's my chance to make a sharp turn since they're right on my tail, still flashing their lights. Like a drifter from the movie, I hit my brakes, beautifully throttle and toggle my brakes and make a drift turn to the left. I'd say by this point I had slowed down to about 60 miles per hour. I was hoping the cloud of burnt rubber would throw them off a little bit, but no, they were right on my tail. Fortunately, I have my concealed carry permit and I am always armed. So at this point, I figured rather than drive like a maniac and risk hurting other people and myself, I would pull over and resolve this situation. I make sure to go to a well-lit parking lot, so I go to the Walmart that's right down the road. I pull into the parking lot there and this car is still right behind me, flashing their lights. As soon as I stop, this person jumps out of their car with a gun and points it right at me, telling me not to move. I kinda froze in that moment and didn't grab my weapon because I figured they'd shoot me. Next thing I know, another car comes up flashing its lights as well. Another person jumps out of that vehicle aiming a weapon at me and tells me to keep my hands on the steering wheel. And then another car comes up. That person gets out with his weapon drawn and walks up to my door, rips it open and grabs and pulls me out and throws me on the ground. The other 2 men then run over to help assist this guy in restraining me. One of them pulls out handcuffs, and that's when I start putting things together. I think these are the police. I'd never seen them in real life. I thought the blue and red lights that were flashing were just some sports car's ground effects reflecting up through the top of the car and maybe even the grille as well. They tell me I'm under arrest for evading an officer, refusing to stop, stuff like that. I don't really remember. And then they throw me in the back of their squad car. They ask me questions about where I'm going, why I didn't stop, all of that stuff, and I gave them all the answers. They told me they didn't believe me, and the next thing I know, I'm at the police station getting booked in. I'd say the worst part of this story is the fact that I don't know my wife's phone number by heart. I have it in my cell phone, but if I didn't have my cell phone, then I don't know how to call her. And when I was thrown to the ground, my cell phone broke, so I had no way of contacting my wife, who was at home waiting for pork rinds last she knew me getting chased by some weirdos. All in all, it was one of the weirdest and strangest nights I've had. And when I made it home, my wife divorced me and said that I was cheating on her. It didn't matter that I had the proper legal documentation to prove I was incarcerated. About 2 months later, she contacts me to let me know that it turns out she wasn't actually pregnant, she just had really bad gas. I guess things do happen for a reason.